Wednesday morning. And good morning. You're listening to the Blaine's World Show, heard each Wednesday here on the new WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at www.wpvmfm.org. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and each week we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in the Asheville area. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my two first guests, Daphne Fox-Chinea, is it?
Correct.
Chinea, and Duane Fernandes from Hemingway's Cuba Restaurant in downtown Asheville. Welcome aboard, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're having some technical difficulties, so I hope that the show is running, and I also hope we're on Facebook Live. But in the meantime, let's just get right into our interview. The radio's working, everything's good, beautiful day. And Hemingway's, Daphne, how long has the restaurant been open?
We opened the restaurant the last week of December 2017. So about 8-9 months now.
Yeah, just under a year.
Okay, and we don't seem to be getting much volume from your mics yet, but we'll work on this. We'll get it all straight. And so you've been over a year. And how long have you been with the restaurant, Daphne?
I came aboard October of last year, 2017.
Okay, and your position is what?
Restaurant supervisor, morning manager.
Okay, and the question I ask all my guests, and I'm going to ask Duane this in a second, but how did you get into this field? Did you always know, as a little girl growing up, did you always know you wanted to be a restaurant manager, supervisor?
No, I didn't actually. I love Cuban food, and Asheville is a hometown, so when I saw that there were going to be a Cuban restaurant opening up in Asheville, I really wanted to be a part of it, and so I applied and became part of it.
That's really cool. When you told me the story, you just kind of walked in and all of a sudden you decided you wanted to be part of it, and they hired you on the spot?
I did. Well, I have a lot of knowledge of Cuban food and Cuban cuisine. My husband's Cuban, so 25 years in a Cuban family. Know a lot about Cuban food.
And Duane, you've been there how long?
Since the opening.
Okay,
Yeah.
Same thing too. When you told me off the air, which I find kind of hard to believe, you've been doing this for some 20 years?
Yeah, 25 years, yeah.
Okay, and so the question was, you started when you were 7?
I think I'm a little older than you might expect.
Is it?
Funny story, though. My dad brought me out in the old Chevy S10 when I was 16. Said he was going to teach me how to drive a stick when I got my learner's permit. And sure enough, that's what we did, squeaking around the neighborhood, and went out on a main road. And he says, we came to a stoplight, and he's like, all right, go through the stoplight, pull ahead to the McDonald's, and let's go have some lunch. Oh, okay, great. Go into the McDonald's, and he calls the manager over. Hey, my son needs a job. So next thing you know, I was working at McDonald's when I was 16. So that's actually how I got started in the industry. But, moving along to some different, pizza places and doing dishes at various restaurants throughout high school. I would look over at the cooks and watch them, create, all the specials and dishes, and just sort of admired them, not only cooking, but the lifestyle and the camaraderie in the kitchen. And so I eventually got promoted to a cook.
I've heard that also, that a lot of people actually do get this start in McDonald's, or fast food restaurants.
Yeah.
How long were you with them?
Oh, just a summer,
Okay.
a few months.
And you decided that wasn't what you wanted to do, flip hamburgers all the time?
No, it was a good introduction into the field, but yeah, I wanted to move on. Yeah.
Yeah, Daphne has told me, I haven't had a hamburger yet at your place, but Daphne has told me you guys have great hamburgers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It actually started at our sister restaurant, Isa's, years ago. It's a really, really good hamburger, 2 patties. It's classic, American cheese, lettuce, tomato, onion. We actually got voted best burger in Asheville a few years back, so we decided to keep that on the menu and move it over to Hemingway's.
The only problem with talking about food, though, now, is that I'm getting hungry listening to this, and so did you bring anything with you today, or?
I'm sorry, no, we certainly didn't.
Okay. So Daphne, back to you, so that and came on board at Hemingway's, and just the very first time I met you, I said, wow, what a natural fit, you know, that you just, it was almost like you were born to be in that position, or you really seem to enjoy it when you're there, do you?
I do, yes. Yes, I'm a people person. I love people and introducing everybody to Cuban cuisine.
Well, and that's the great thing, too. Not only is the food Cuban cuisine, but also you're blessed, I think, from a standpoint of being at the facility where you are. It's one of the great places to have food at in
Yes.
Asheville, I think. Explain it for the benefit of our listeners. You know, what they get when they go to Hemingway's.
Well, you're going to get something a little different. A lot of folks are not familiar yet with Cuban cuisine. It is a Caribbean food, and it is a first or an authentic Cuban restaurant in downtown Asheville. So it's a Latin music playing when you come in. There's a spectacular view from our terrace. You know, people that work there are really friendly and nice, and the food is fabulous. So.
And like you said, what really impressed me the very first time I went to Hemingway's, a couple things. You walk in, and then you have, first of all, the great, on the walls, you have some of the most incredible murals on the wall. What are those about?
One is of the Floridita. It's in Havana, Cuba, and it depicts the street there. Ernest Hemingway spent a lot of time at the Floridita in Havana, and he did a lot of writing there. The Cuban people, they really loved Ernest Hemingway, and so we wanted to bring that also to Asheville. The owners, spent a lot of time there when he was a boy, going to the Floridita with his father and enjoying these exquisite meals, and so we now have the mural on our wall.
And that was the one mural. Then the other mural is a beautiful wall, too.
Yes, that's of Havana Bay, and there's also a mural there that shows Ernest Hemingway fishing from his fishing boat in Havana Bay.
And I'm just curious, am I the only one who put myself in front of a picture of it, or do other people get the
Oh,
pictures?
a lot of people, almost everyone that comes in, they want to stand in front of those murals and get their pictures taken.
And also I like, too, at the bar, I did get my picture with Ernest. You know,
Yes.
there's the bust of him, too.
Yes.
So it's a real cool thing. But you continue, not only is it great to stay inside, but describe what happens when people get to dine outside. What's the view, and what happens there?
Well, it's a 4,000 square foot terrace. We have 3 fire pits, there's sofas, there's tables, and lots of dining areas there. There's an awning that comes out if it's a rainy day or if it's very sunny, you can sit under the awning so you're away from the weather elements. There's tropical plants out there. Get a bird's eye view of downtown Asheville. It's really spectacular.
It's really, I think, one of the most beautiful views, and just on a beautiful night to be out there, it's just spectacular.
Yes.
And we'll tie back into Duane that when they come out there, then they're going to have some pretty good food. Would you say?
Yes.
Food's pretty good. Well, if you get a little closer to the mic,
Yep.
that'd be great. And talk a little bit about the menu. What kinds of things can people expect?
Well, a lot of these recipes are traditional Cuban food. So, I've worked very closely with the owners, as Daphne mentioned earlier, are from Cuba. So a lot of these recipes are very traditional. We do have a couple of items on the menu that are not necessarily Cuban for the folks that are dining there that might not necessarily be into Cuban food. A lot of great options, mostly stemming from traditional recipes.
Also, some of the really great things too. The plantains are my favorite when they go there. And
Yeah.
there are 2 kinds of plantains. You get the traditional, I guess, and the chips.
We have green plantains that we get in and very ripe plantains. So the ripe plantains, we fry them, and they're called maduros. And what happens when you cook them, they caramelize. All the sugars sort of caramelize and cook, and they become very, very sweet. Now, when we use the green plantains, the sugars haven't quite developed. So we shave those really thin, and we fry those as well, and they become crispy, almost like a plantain chip.
And you also do you have also chips as well, is that correct?
We do.
Yeah. And those are like my favorite. We go crazy on them. How do you make those?
Yeah, those are fried, the same, just sliced very, very thinly, fried, and then we serve them with a mojo sauce, which is a citrus-based sauce, lots of garlic and onion, a little cumin, and some oregano.
Out of all the dishes you have, what's your favorite?
I would have to say the vaca frita, which is a shredded beef dish. It's braised for about 6-7 hours, and then the meat is pulled and sort of shredded. And then we have a large flat top in the kitchen where we basically shred it and put it on there and let it sort of cook a little more. And what that does, it creates a good contrast of crispy. The beef gets crispy on one side and then sort of soft in the middle as well. And then we saute that with garlic and onions, splash a little mojo on there, and it's good to go. A good combination of textures and citrus flavor.
Question I asked you off the air, I'll ask you on the air, and that's when somebody comes to your place or to any restaurant, is it a good idea to ask, for example, the server what the chef's favorite dish is?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Do people ask you that?
It's happened a couple times. I think most people ask the server what their favorite dish is, but yeah, absolutely. It's happened quite a few times.
And what makes a favorite dish for you? What makes it a favorite?
Just the flavor of the bacca frita really sort of stands out to me. The combination of the crispiness and soft beef and the earthiness of the beef, but then with all the lime juice, going on and the garlic. It's just the flavor is excellent.
And I'll ask the same question of Daphne in terms of the stuff they have there. Do you have a favorite dish?
Well, at dinner I really like the arroz con pollo. It's a chicken dish with the yellow rice. It's really good. My mother-in-law used to make that a lot. And Duane's got that recipe down. For breakfast, I really like the Cuban breakfast sandwich.
And describe, because that's one of my favorites, the Cuban sandwich in general. What's that? What's in that?
The Cuban sandwich has pulled pork and it has ham, has a pickle. It's on Cuban bread, mustard, Swiss cheese.
So I didn't realize I've had that too, but I've had it when I've come in other times. It's also available for breakfast?
It is a breakfast. They have scrambled eggs on it. So it's just a little extra something in there.
Wow. So what I gather, and I've told you this a couple of times, that when you leave your place, not too many people complain that they're hungry, I assume.
No. You get good portion sizes. It's
really good
filling.
portion size, and it's really good as well. In terms of people coming there for the first time, do you have some people who tell you they never had Cuban food before?
Often, yes.
And so and you did this with us, I think, the first time we were there too. What's the orientation you give them?
Well, there's a lot of flavoring in there, a lot of oreganos or garlic or spices. A lot of times people come in expecting that it's going to be a spicy food, and I let them know that it's Caribbean food. It's not spicy, like, a lot of people think it's going to be spicy and hot, and it's not. It's Caribbean, a lot of great flavors.
And one of the things, too, I remember when I went there, I'm not a big spice guy either, but I'll ask Duane his feeling on this, that do you mind it when people tell you that they want it little spice or no spice as a chef? Does that insult you?
No, the bottom line is we're cooking for the guests. We're there to make them happy. So if they want to kick it up with some hot sauce or leave it out, it's totally
Do you have some
fine.
people tell you that they want it spicier?
Oh, absolutely. All the time, actually. Yeah, people ask for jalapenos and, spicy peppers, which, of course, we don't carry in a Cuban kitchen. But we do have a great local hot sauce we have.
Now, do you have anybody ever tell you the opposite? They say it's too hot for them, or
No, there's no heat in any of that food, so that never happens.
Okay. Talk to me also, and I think, Daphne, you explained it to me the first time I went there, but talk a little bit about Cuban coffee, okay? Because one of the things I guess you're famous for, that people look forward to getting, is the Cuban coffee. And what's that?
Daphne's the expert on the Cuban coffee.
Because, yeah, you did explain it to us.
So we have, the American coffee, the traditional cup of coffee, you come in, you get your brew, coffee, cream, and sugar. Then the Cuban coffee, it's like an espresso, but the Cubans have a way of doing a pre-sweetened. So you take a sugar mixture and you mix it up. So as the espresso brews, you mix in the sugar and it creates this frothy foam on the top of it. So it's lightly sweetened, or you can make it sweeter if people have a preference, they like it more or less sweet. So Cuban coffee is like a shot of espresso with sugar in it already. And there's also a really popular beverage called the café con leche, which is a steamed milk with a shot of Cuban coffee in it, or a cortadito, which is a shot of Cuban coffee with 3 scoops of foam on the top. So it gives it just a little bit of milk, but not too much milk.
And do people sometimes want to try all of them? That's right.
Well, if they try all of them, they might want to run around the block. But
No, but I'm saying
I
at
always tell them
different
come
times.
back
Yeah, right.
again and try a different one, so that way you become familiar with all of them. But yeah, I've had parties come in and everyone at the table order a different one just to try it.
That'd be kind of cool. How many different coffees are there?
There are like 6 different. So with Cuban coffee, the cafe con leche, the cortadito, and the cafe. Then of course we have the American coffee. We can also make cappuccinos or cafe lattes. You know, I'm pretty good at making coffee drinks. So from there, anything you order coffee, I'm gonna make it for you.
Daphne's the expert on
On the coffee?
Oh yeah,
Coffee.
we go to her many mornings.
No, it's very impressed too. Like you said, Duane, the very first time I came in, which is kind of fun. I guess you do this with other first-time visitors. You review with them, I guess, the menu or what to expect.
Yes, let them know. Ask if they have any questions, if they've ever had Cuban food before, if they have a favorite, or you know, if they'd like to try something new.
What would say the people come, and the exciting thing I think about Asheville is that you are, I guess, the first and only still Cuban restaurant, are you now?
Authentic Cuban, yes.
Which is really nice. So the people who come, are a lot of them, it's the first time they've ever had Cuban food?
Yes.
Okay. And what's really cool, certainly, we're an example of it, that people come back after they've been there once?
Yes, definitely. And if you've only came for dinner, then I highly recommend to come in and try breakfast because, you know, it's unique. It's a great place to see the sunrise in the morning. And if you've only came for breakfast, then definitely come back for dinner because the menu is fabulous.
And talk a little bit about the breakfast menu because, again, I've been there for both breakfast and dinner. In the breakfast menu, I had, of course, the very traditional Cuban dish. One of my favorites, chocolate chip pancakes. You know, and it really was authentic. Aside from the sandwich you mentioned, are there other Cuban breakfast specialties?
The bistec a caballo, which is a steak with eggs on top, sunny side eggs. You can get them made however you like. We also have a cayocho wrap.
But let me stop you a second. I love your pronunciation too, you know. And so if I go there and can't pronounce it that same way, you just point to it or you would figure it out?
You could just pronounce it how it looks. You can say the bistec a caballo. That's what it looks like, but yeah.
Well, I guess that's your advantage. You speak
I know kitchen Spanish and obviously the menu items, but I'm not fluent.
Oh, no?
That's another thing we lean on Daphne for.
Well, no,
to help us out.
But that must be really nice. I mean, do you have Cubans come to the restaurant?
Yes, definitely. And, you know, the folks that we get in that are either from Miami or from Tampa or that are Cuban, and they come here, they'll say, oh, it's so great to have, you know, my own home foods back here that I can get in Asheville, or, oh, this is just like I had in Miami, this is so good. So it's nice to hear people say that have had it before how great it is, and it reminds them of being back home or of their families.
Because I have a friend from Miami, and I was telling him about the restaurant, and I really want him to come because I guess he knows Cuban food or something like that. And it must be fun for you, so when they come, you speak to them in Spanish?
A lot of times, yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Talk also a little bit about the configuration of the restaurant. First of all, it's just beautiful. Even if you're inside, you have beautiful views. You can accommodate, I guess, parties, and I haven't had a party there yet, but you can accommodate parties, I assume?
Yes, we do have a 4,000 square foot banquet room. Can be divided into 4 separate quadrants, one big large ballroom, meeting spaces, conferences, and we do have a lot of folks come in and rent out the rental spaces in the back, and we have a boardroom as well.
But the fun part, and I've seen those spaces, they're nice, but the fun part would be in the restaurant or outside, you know,
Yes.
just, I don't know, could you have a conference, have you had conferences or meetings outside?
There
of a
have
large group?
been, there was a wedding on the terrace. We do have people that'll rent out space on the terrace. Yes.
Duane, I've always wondered from the chef's standpoint, and tell me if this is proper etiquette or something, but do you ever get people, I've never done this, but have you ever get people to ask to see the chef or compliment the chef?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's some of the biggest praises I've seen there, especially, you know, older families actually from Cuba, and we've actually had 2 separate guests actually cry because they haven't had an authentic meal like that since they've lived in Cuba years ago. So it really hits an emotional spot sometimes.
But I've wondered from an etiquette standpoint, I've never done this, but you're giving me an idea to do something. If I've had a really good meal, for example, at Hemingway's or anything else, is it proper or is it okay to ask to speak to the chef, or do people ever call you out?
Absolutely. You know, that's feedback is great. You know, I would maybe avoid that on a busy Friday or Saturday night. You know, but no, absolutely. Yeah.
Of a positive nature, but even of a negative nature, I guess you want to hear it.
Negative nature, you know, of course you don't want to go out there and
No, but you want to hear it, though, I guess.
absolutely, you know, you need to know where the mistakes have been made or where there's opportunity to better the cuisine, absolutely.
And in part, I would imagine it's an education standpoint. I think that's what Daphne is so good at, that, and I met one person who was with the restaurant before you came on board, and it's just really impressive that he did a whole education thing. You know, he's explaining about the restaurant and the food. That was kind of fun as the first time person there. Do you enjoy teaching about it?
Yes, I do. I do.
It's so unusual, you know, a lot of places you just go to and you just sit down and then here's the menu. But to have somebody come over and greet you, speak Spanish if you don't know Spanish, you know, it's still very impressive. But you seem to enjoy doing that too, and you have this great smile and you have fun doing it.
Yes, I do.
In terms of, let's talk about it from a standpoint of kids. Do kids like, first of all, I should ask in general about kids and Cuban food. They're not familiar with it for the most part, a lot of times. Do they experience it for the first time with you?
Sometimes, yes. You know, like my kids grew up eating Cuban food, so they definitely like to come to the restaurant now. They're like, oh, this is like the food I ate when I was a kid. Cuban children, they love the croquetas and the empanadas, and they're familiar with it. A lot of times here, you know, kids may say, oh, I've not had Cuban food, they don't know what it is. Kids can be picky sometimes about what they're going to try, but I've always seen the kids really like the food that they eat.
And what's cool about what you do, I'm trying to recall the kids menu. You have a kids menu, or you have stuff for kids, is that
We
correct?
do.
But that's very traditional stuff. But do you have a kids menu with some Cuban stuff on it as well?
We do. We've actually, now we have a kids breakfast menu that has a kids Cuban breakfast. We also have the traditional, and we have the pancakes, but yes, incorporating
The Cuban pancakes.
Yeah, the Cuban. They're not quite as big as you had that day. They're
Right.
kids' portions, but yes.
When my daughter comes in the restaurant, we have a large small plates section, which a lot of people will get 3 or 4 items and sort of share. And that's what she sort of does, picks, you know, maybe a bite of a croquette here, and maybe she'll try the ceviche and move on to something different. So there's a lot of smaller plates that you can enjoy as well.
And what's really cool, Duane, you're doing that. Your daughter is how old?
She's 6.
Okay, and your children are how old?
Oh, they're adults now.
Okay, they're
they're
adults.
22 and 26.
Someday they'll live with grandchildren or something.
Yes.
But what's really cool what you did, and I never had this as a child or enough of it, that you're introducing them to other foods, you know, as opposed to just having the kids' portion traditionally is the hot dog or the hamburger or something like that. It's really neat that they can try different stuff. How receptive are kids to trying stuff?
You know, I guess it really depends on the day, you know. Some days she's not having it at all and wants their mac and cheese, but other days, if, you know, everyone's having fun and sharing, she'll completely fill up on something that's, you know, somewhat foreign to her.
I remember as a kid, my dad, to try something, I'd be given a nickel. You know, and I remember my daughter wanted $1, you know, in inflation or something. But it's bad, Daphne, because I never really got into the habit that I should have of trying enough different kinds of things, different foods. When your children were younger, did you expose them to different kinds of foods?
When my children were young, we lived in Miami, so there was a lot of different things to try. So yes, they've tried so many different foods from different countries and different places.
And that's, I think, a cool thing about Asheville, that there are quite a number, before you folks were even here, not Cuban restaurants, but a lot of different ethnic restaurants. That's kind of a cool thing, you know, to be able to try in a town. When people come into Hemingway's, talk a little bit about the music that happens in Hemingway's, both inside and we'll talk about outside. There's some music, but you play music in Hemingway's?
We do. We have Latin music. So when you know, I had someone tell me that they got in the elevator, and as they were coming up to the 4th floor, they could hear the music, and it almost sounded like they were in Miami or somewhere. And then the elevator door opened, and they felt like they were in Havana. And it was like the music was great. It just really made the experience. So, yeah, it's Latin music. which is now becoming really popular. I'm hearing more and more on the radio, even regular stations that used to not play Latin music, they're mixing it in. So yeah.
Now, you're playing, I think you told me you play music, but you've also had some live music there as well?
We have.
What, indoors or indoors?
Well, we've had both. We had them inside in the beginning. I think once they played outside, so right now we generally just have live music on special occasions or special events. But we always have the music. We've got a great sound system now that we have it playing both inside and outside.
Because what would be cool, I'm just thinking out loud, if you came in there, weekend night, whatever, and you had music playing, but you have it kind of in the front of it with a fireplace, would be kind of almost like a cool place to dance. I don't know, does anybody dance?
We have had a dance floor out on the terrace.
Would be nice.
For our big grand opening, we had the paella cooking out there and dancing in the patio and live music. So we have had dancing. But yeah, that's a great idea.
But I'm just saying, because my wife and I like to dance, or just something that we have dinner, and just if music was playing, it doesn't have to be a dance floor, but just, where I'm talking, that's a beautiful waiting room area, and that'd be a fun place to, just dance if there was music playing.
Sometimes we do have people come up dancing.
Yeah.
We've had bachelorette parties and different people over there dancing, and it is fun.
You've been there a year now, Duane. Any plans in terms of next year moving forward, even in terms of menu changes, or do you try different things on the menu?
Yeah, we are always going to try to stick to the traditional Cuban recipes. But yeah, moving into the fall, we're certainly going to put a few more braised sort of items on the menu. We're sort of coming up with some dishes as we speak to transition into the fall. Yeah.
How do you come up with ideas for new menu items?
Well, honestly, the owners are a huge part in guiding us as far as the cuisine goes, just because of their background in Cuba. And then digging through a lot of his old cookbooks from Cuba.
Can people make suggestions to you, or will you? One of the things I do sometimes, I want a dish a certain kind of way. If people come in want something prepared a special way, will you do that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And will you prepare, if they want to, do they ever suggest a new kind of dish or something that they'd like to add to the menu?
We might have had that once or twice, but that doesn't happen too often.
Okay, so, well, first of all, it's a pretty extensive menu, though, too.
It's a pretty large menu, yeah.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can pretty much going to find anything you want it. And one of the things I like about it, too, or people don't want to try Cuban food or not adventurous, you have a kind of an interesting mix, and I think you've done a good job with that, with both Cuban foods, but there's some so traditional foods as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got probably 3 or 4 non-traditional Cuban items on there. Everybody doesn't like Cuban food, so we don't want them to feel out of place. So.
Or they should try it at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that.
Exactly.
Or that's, I guess you were mentioning you had small plates.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Yep, a large section in the menu of small plates, so it's really easy to get 2 or 3 of those items and share, so you're not committing to a large entree.
And then I think what you also do, it was, I don't know if called small plates or the appetizers, but you also have another way to try stuff. It's just before you begin dinner, try something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our most popular dishes is our paellas. So we have an option for serves 2 people and then serves 6 people, and it actually comes to the table in the paella pan it was cooked in, and the server will serve it to you, and it's a really fun way to eat.
And the only thing I'm thinking out loud is that next time you come on board, I want you to bring some of this stuff with you and cook it for us. And
Okay.
that would be a great, especially Facebook Live, if it's showing that you actually try it and give it to the radio show host or something.
There you go.
Daphne, if anybody wants to find out more about Hemingway's, we should mention 2 things. One, in terms of the hours, or what?
We are open for breakfast from 7 a.m. to 11 every day. And for dinner, we open Saturday and Sunday currently at 3:30 p.m. And then weekdays we open at 4:30 p.m.
Okay. And to find out more information, you also have a website?
We do. It's HemingwaysCubaAsheville.com. We are also on Facebook and also on Instagram.
Okay, I know you handle a lot of that and do a nice job. You're going to see stuff.
We do, yes. And we now have Allison aboard, and she does a lot of that stuff for us.
Okay, well, anyway, I'd like to thank both Daphne, you, and Duane for being my guest this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. And we'll look forward to seeing you back at Hemingway's.
Great, we look forward to seeing
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks a lot, guys. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, as they work their way out of the studio, get out. No, I didn't be rude, but just as they work their way out the studio, I'd like to mention two announcements. One is concerns our underwriting for the show, and we're grateful to have an underwriter for the show, and we appreciate the support of French Broad Food Co-op, a locally owned grocery store focusing more on people than profits, providing living wages, supporting local farmers and producers, and being locally owned. More information is available on the web at French Broad Food Co-op. I'd now like to recognize also some upcoming theater productions that will be happening in the Asheville area. And two come to mind. Let me see if I can find them. The first is it was sent to me by my friend Kai Hamilton. It's time to get spooky again at Tryon Arts and Crafts School. And they have a national ghost story competition is underway. And to find out more about that, you can look at www.tryonartsandcrafts.org/ghost story. So if you have a ghost story you want to submit to this exciting contest and perhaps even get produced by Tryon Arts Art Center, send in a ghost story. In addition, Lois Langale Hendrickson is involved in a production called My Grandfather's Prayers. And it's hosted by Red Herring Puppets in White Horse Black Mountain. 2 dates, September 1st and September 2nd. They'll be at White Horse Black Mountain. And it's a really amazing theatrical production with puppets, with music, with lots of other good stuff. And you want to find out more about that, check out whitehorseblackmountain.com at the website. And now, I finally get to meet my second guest. We've been back and forth on Facebook a long time. And she is Duane Westmoreland. And welcome aboard, Duane.
Hey, Blaine, how are you?
Okay, great. It's so exciting to finally get to meet you. I think you want to just lift up the mic a little bit so you're talking right up to it just like this. That'd be great. You're sounding good. And I should mention that Duane is an HR consultant on workplace bullying and discrimination. Her company is Duane Westmoreland Consulting. And it's not a black and mortar business as she describes. You can reach her by phone, by Skype, some other ways as well. But Duane has authored 2 books. She's a podcaster, speaker, and a certified professional coach. She's a skilled, highly human resource manager with, again, 27 years of experience. Where'd that come in? You know, again, I always say you're another person started at 6. Was that it?
Did I start at 6 years old?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
6 years
kind of
old,
you.
so that's 33, whatever. But what she does, and that's where I really want you to come on board, Duane, she provides a how-to system to reduce workplace bullying and discrimination to executive teams and some other folks as well. So let's talk about workplace bullying, because it is a problem out there. And how big a problem is it?
It's a real problem. I mean, you get on social media, you get on the news, and you find out about people being fired, people being mistreated. I get contacted on a daily basis. I mean, I get bombarded. The work that I do, I eat, sleep, drink it every single day. I get contacted nearly every day about somebody being harmed, sexually harassed. I mean, I get calls from men, from women, and it's mostly from employees. But there's a real issue with both sides, employees and employers.
What's really interesting, I think, about the subject is that it's relatively new in terms of when I was a kid, for example, or even when I started work. I guess there was certainly workplace bullying, but nobody ever talked about it. You know, never knew about it. How did it become, quote, a hot topic?
Well, you know, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has been around for quite a while, and, you know, Title VII was created in 1964. I can remember that because that's the year I was born. I'm one of the last of the baby boomers, right? So I think people got sick and tired of it and started speaking up, speaking out, and it made the news because it's been around a long time. And one thing that I've studied and found out to be sure is that men get bullied almost as much as women, and that's not my research.
It's funny, I seem to think about it first come to forefront with Anita Hill, you know,
Yes.
in terms of, even when it's more than just workplace bullying or sexual harassment, but that's when it really seemed to hit the news and people started talking about it. Yet you raised such a good point, and I never thought about it, but men being bullied as well. And talk a little bit about that.
Well, I saw something on, I believe it was on Forbes.com, it's all over the news, about a man. He was a student and he was being harassed by his professor, female, and it was sexual harassment. Now, discrimination is different than bullying. Bullying in the workplace is not illegal, but if you go to, for example, here's a reference. If you go to the website www.eeoc and do a search for harassment discrimination, that's hostility in the workplace, that's illegal. So that made the news because you hardly ever hear about men talking about being harassed and bullied, but it goes hand in hand. So sometimes people are bullied, sometimes they're discriminated, and oftentimes it's both.
Talk about then also the difference, though, where you're saying there's harassment and then there's bullying, and there's sort of a difference between the two. Would you say, or it's all related?
Well, it seems very similar. If you go to the website that I was talking about, it will spell out exactly what harassment discrimination is. It's hostility in the work environment. It's to the point where somebody's being harassed so much, so severely, and consistently that they can't perform their duties. And it's a little bit more than that. Bullying could be something so simple as somebody's not told about an event at work, because they single them out. They're different. They don't like the person, and they don't tell them about a meeting, and then they miss the meeting. It could be so subtle as that.
It's funny you say that because in another life I was involved in a way back when God was a little girl. I say, but you remember those, or before Dirk or whatever. But it was interesting because I was active in a teachers union. I was grievance chair, I was president of teachers union, and people would oftentimes come to me that they were being bullied or they were being harassed, but they were afraid to say anything, and that's part of the problem, I guess, that people are experiencing this, but they're afraid to come forward.
Yeah, I was just having this discussion with a guy yesterday because, I was asking him his opinion, why don't men speak up? And I believe some of it for the men is social conditioning. You're supposed to be tough. You're not supposed to speak about your feelings. We've conditioned our men to be like that. And I think times are changing now. I know women speak up more. I know I spoke up because when I was being bullied in my former job, people would follow me to the bathroom. Of course, these are women, and they would ask me questions. They're like, "Dawn, you worked in human resources. Isn't this wrong? Isn't this illegal? Isn't this, bullying?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And I'm like, "Well, what are you going to do about it if you're seeing it firsthand? I know what I'm going to do about it." So everybody has different sets of skills and tools. Not everybody has the strength, the tools, the knowledge, the education, the motivation, the discipline to speak up. Because oftentimes, especially in the federal government, there's more retaliation. If you do your research, and go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's website, they'll tell you there's a lot more retaliation in the federal government because it's a different process, a grievance process.
You raised a good point also about something being bullying versus something illegal, and I think there's perhaps a fine line, but whether it's illegal or just improper, it shouldn't be happening either way. That people shouldn't, in general, people shouldn't be bullied, is a good, I guess, general statement.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it really trickles down from leadership in a company, corporation, a federal agency. If they allow it, then it just sets the wrong tone, and then there's bullying. But what happens is it harms the workplace. It harms the culture of the people. The bystanders see it. They're afraid to speak up because they're afraid they're going to get fired or they're going to get retaliated against. So it has great harm. In the civilian private sector, if somebody goes to file, a grievance or something like that, they go into some kind of litigation. It could be very damaging, very embarrassing, very costly in the federal government. Oftentimes it's settled, and that's the taxpayers' money. And it can also drag out those grievances for 4 to 5 years, especially if you go with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, because they are so bogged down. 4 to 5 years, can you imagine waiting for an outcome?
And can you imagine, even worse, being the person having to go through that, and even going through the process that's still being bullied or something like that. Talk a little bit about doing some of the work you do, I guess, from a corporate culture, that how can a corporation do, I guess, 2 things. One, find out if bullying is taking place in their workplace, and I guess a lot of times they don't know until somebody brings a grievance. And then we'll talk about what can be done about it. But if I'm a company, I contact you to work with my company, how do I first of all do an inventory or find out how big a problem it is?
Okay, now a lot of larger companies do have human resource personnel,
Sure.
and I've worked in HR about 27 years now. And it's so easy for the HR personnel to be so bogged down with their everyday
Right.
duties. Really, I mean, they are busy. I was always busy when I mostly worked in the federal government, and I retired from the Air Force, so 20 years in the Air Force in HR. So you really need an outside person, I believe, to come in, and they have to get to the core of the issues. I mean, if I walk into a company, if I notice that people look like scared rabbits, I'm thinking, what's going on here? Straight up, I use my gut feelings, my intuition, but, you got to get to the core problem, what's going on, do a survey of the people, anonymous, and find out how they feel about their workplace. You have to get to the root of problems. You have to find out what has been done as far as training. Right now, what I'm seeing a trend in is just compliance, because the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission says, when you have a certain amount of employees, that you have to have all this training, this compliance training on discrimination and retaliation and all that. But what's happening is a lot of companies are just doing this compliance. They're not being proactive, they're being reactive. And then the next thing we hear about is we find out in the news, we find out all over the internet that somebody's in trouble, a company. So if I go into a company, the first thing I would do is, like I said, I watch the people, do a survey, I would look at all their training. I'm big into accountability. So leadership needs to make sure that the supervisors are doing their job right, properly documenting up bullying and discrimination, and that they have their own internal grievance program, so hopefully that things can be settled right then and there.
And you raised an interesting point. Reminds me of an organization that I was involved in. I won't mention the name, but there was a big push maybe 20 years ago to, we should do this, we should survey people, we should have training, all that. They did it, and then 20 years, that was it. Nothing ever again. And so, no offense to HR, and HR is busy and they do good work, but they were oblivious to some of this until a complaint was brought forward. It's a shame.
Yeah, and oftentimes I hear, and rightfully so, people are really mad at human resources. In fact, I had this conversation recently with somebody who wrote an article about human resources. And it was a really well-written article. They were talking about the bullying and how HR didn't have their back. So I felt compelled to reach out to this person and explain that not every HR person is like that. I know there's been 2 or 3 times I was nearly fired for standing up for employees. And actually that person, today is a client. She was, fired from her job, unfairly fired for speaking up, speaking out. And a lot of states are at will, but there was hostility in the workplace, and there was potential, to meet the guidelines of harassment, discrimination. So there's somebody that distrusted HR, and I said, hey, don't put us all in, one lump sum. There are a lot of people out there that are good people.
It's probably exciting for you when you look at a company and it clicks,
Yeah.
that people are smiling and having a good time, and they feel open, their voices and opinions can be heard. And so I would imagine that's part of the bullying thing. If somebody feels they can't speak up or say something to somebody, that's not a good sign.
No, leadership has to have an open door, but when I say open door, I don't mean that somebody can come in at any time, because they have to get their work done, they have to be productive. They may say from, for 2 hours during this time, 10 to 12, I have an open door and you can come and talk to me without retaliation. And I know companies like down in Atlanta that have different support groups within the company. It's a big insurance company. And they have different support groups, like, for the LGBT, the Asians and such. And they have contact people if somebody feels that they're being mistreated, or they just need a little bit more attention, validation, approval, to be with like-minded people. And this company seems to be working very well.
Question comes to mind as to your role and your involvement in this. And how do you get involved in this? You mentioned you've been in HR, but how do you kind of key in specifically on workplace bullying?
How do I key in, or how did I get started?
How did you get involved in it?
Oh, I never saw this coming. Well, probably about 6 years ago, I spoke up about nepotism. Most of my career has been in the federal government. That's illegal, hiring family and friends. I started it. I worked in a federal agency where I noticed only 5 black personnel were out of about 550. And one of those folks is one of my best friends. She's down in Savannah right now, and we got together, and ironically, she had a equal employment opportunity background, and me working in HR, and I don't believe in, coincidences. It was meant to be that we worked together, and we talked, and we said, do you see what's going on? So she and I both spoke up independently, and I got a lot of retaliation. I ended up filing discrimination because I qualified for disability discrimination. Some people are disabled, like me. I have invisible disabilities, and that's the route that I took after speaking up to Office Special Counsel that handles prohibited personnel practices. They did nothing, so I took matters in my hand, wrote up my cases. I had retaliation. It was pretty bad. Spent some time in the mental health ward after 18 months of being harassed. And I won't go into all the harassment. I mean, people said, well, how did you end up in the mental health ward? Well, when you have 18 months harassment, your paycheck's cut off, you lose everything, materialistically. I mean, and I was doing this all by myself, and I was also writing up my own cases and such. But that's where I had my greatest transformation, and I'm so transparent about this to help other people to realize that you don't have to be a victim. I mean, we all go through it, but you don't have to stay there. So looked in the metal mirror the third day, and I said, who are you? I kind of had a hate fest with myself. I was very mad at myself because, I grew up with 7 brothers, stepbrothers, my brothers, spent 20 years in the Air Force, very strong person. But it was a series of many bad things that had happened to me that I know the psychiatrist said that it would have probably killed somebody else. They would have committed suicide. But we can all have a breaking point. But my greatest transformation was that third day looking in that, I call it the mental health mirror, and I said, okay, enough is enough. And then I knew at that time I was supposed to go through all this, to do the advocacy, to do the work I do. I got out, become a life coach. I'm already an advanced hypnotist. And so it just got me really excited, and I started writing books, and people heard about me, and I met Erin Brockovich a year ago and interviewed her on my podcast. She's asked me to do some projects with her. One of the top FBI leaders has reached out to me, heard about me, speaking up and my background. It takes a lot of guts and courage to speak up about wrongdoing, illegal activities, and receive this severe retaliation that will break most people.
And as you said, not only do you receive retaliation, but also you have to go through that process. So it's bad enough to have to endure it for a year, 5 years, 10 years, but then to have to go through the process, and that's another. You said it could be 4. Can you imagine 4 or 5 years? That's pretty scary.
Yeah, and it's 4 or 5 years generally. If it's just discrimination only, it can be up to 4 to 5 years. And it depends on what city you're in, because they have field offices. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has administrative judges, and they're mobile. They go to the city that you're assigned to and such. So if there's retaliation, what they do is they triage it. And I mean, just like going to the emergency room, if you had a stubbed toe and somebody has a heart attack, obviously the heart attack patient's going to go first. So I had severe retaliation, so I had a hearing within 1 year, and that's really, really fast with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Now, during that year, were you still working too?
No. My paycheck, one of the things to do, retaliate against me, was to cut my paycheck off, and so I ended up losing my nice home in South Asheville, and, it changed my life, but I have to tell you, in a positive manner, it taught me resiliency, taught me to be even stronger, and I already was strong. And it also, the old Dawn Westmoreland died, and I never have been the same since. I'm getting chills as I tell you this. I become a real powerhouse and got out there and started helping employees for 5 years before I started reaching out to, employers. And now I'm working with attorneys, assisting them with cases, and mental health professionals.
I like how you call it too, or you told me off the air, you call yourself your own worst bully.
I did.
But that's a great description in a way. Why do you call yourself your own worst bully?
I call myself my own worst bully because, through all of it, I wrote up my own documentation. I had an employment attorney at the end to be my voice box, but, I just got worn down. And I had a moment of, maybe more than a moment of victimhood, and I was very mad at myself for feeling victimized. I was very mad at myself that I wasn't strong enough to keep myself out of the mental health ward. Now I checked myself in. I'd passed out a couple times from exhaustion. I wasn't suicidal or anything like that. I was angry at myself for feeling like a victim. And at that point I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that's when it shifted. And I told the psychiatrist, it's time for me to go. And after having an interdisciplinary, where they talk and they're like, oh wow, you are good. I'm like, yeah, I always was good. I just, I had some time down.
Now you're better. They talk about if you're an employee and you're listening to the show, or you experienced discrimination, or excuse me, workplace bullying and harassment, all this stuff. What's the first thing you should do?
If somebody's being bullied?
Yeah.
Well, I'm big about writing documentation. When I settled with this former federal agency, I did so a couple days before we were going to actually have the administrative hearing with the judge, and I did it without signing a gag order or a silence order, and I did it off of documentation only, and that impressed a lot of people, and people heard about that, especially a bunch of leadership across America reached out to me and like, whoa, how did you do that? And I said, I'm going to tell you straight up, I've worked in HR, and I knew a lot of things, but I learned as I went. And so what I teach people today, and this is on both sides, this is for the employee and the employer, it's all about written documentation. So if you're an employee and you reached out to me and you said, hey Dawn, I'm being bullied, one of the first things I would tell you to do is write an email from work telling the perpetrator, and you may add HR, the leadership, and be very professional, very objective, tell them that, the incident, the time, the date, document. I do email trails. That's my saving grace. And that's how I was able to get my settlement. And also on the other side for employers too, if they don't have good documentation, they may get into litigation later that they had the training, that they followed up with complaints of somebody reaching out saying, hey, this is a hostile work environment, and it could be possibly harassment, discrimination. That's where they get themselves in trouble. Documentation.
Back up on something you said, the documentation. So the first time, not the first time you experience this, but if you have a process, you've been bullied for a long period of time, you feel, harassed, put it in writing. Do you recommend the first time to copy HR?
It depends. It depends how serious it is. I mean, sometimes people just have very aggressive, assertive personalities. They don't realize it. But, you have people out there with very aggressive behaviors. And some people are very hateful. Some people who have been diagnosed as narcissistic or psychopaths. It really is an individual situation. If it's really severe, like discrimination or severe bullying, darn right I would add HR, because HR usually is part of management, and they're going to contact management right away. I know, when I worked in employee labor relations, they wanted to know instantly what's going on, and so sometimes it might be very important to add HR.
Is it possible to change the behavior around? Can you work, for example, with a company, and you work with companies where you've identified workplace bullies or something? Do you ever see them change?
I have, but as I said earlier, Blaine, it all comes down to leadership. What are they willing to tolerate? If they're willing to tolerate aggressive behavior, it sets the tone. But I have seen changes where people are no nonsense about, it's not that everybody has to be perfect and it's going to be a perfect day every day, and that somebody's not going to feel good and maybe they're a little cross, but it really comes down to what is the company willing to tolerate, or the corporation or the federal agency.
Talk about your work with companies then. So you've been in this field for several years now, and now you kind of work at the company level, and you work with companies in terms of, we talked about assessing the situation or doing some, surveys. And on top of that, do you work with them in terms of where do you go from here? Do you develop programs that they should be developing?
Yeah, I've created some programs, after I know what the root of the problem is, how many people are unhappy, what's going on, the flavor of the culture and such, that's at the time when you tell the leadership, here's how the people feel about you, here's the percentage. I mean, we don't turn over names and such and say Johnny's, doesn't like you because of this and that, but to tell them, where their weaknesses are, where they're liable to get into litigation. The cost of replacing good employees is very, very high. I mean, depending on where you go for a resource, I've heard up to 75% of the cost of rehiring a person, because when you lose a good person, when I say good person, a good employee that does good work, they're kind, they're compassionate, those are some of the people that get picked on the most. And there's all kinds of surveys out there online that will, or on the website, that will tell you the kind of people that get picked on the most. So kind, compassionate people, intellectuals, high achievers, those people get picked on the most because there's jealousy from the bully. But people who are also whistleblowers speaking up about illegal activities and things like that, or prohibited personnel practices, I don't care if you're kind, nice, sort of, those people get picked on a lot. So, identify the risk, show in, black and white and written, here's a report, here's what's going on in your company, and here's some strategies to reduce, because you're never going to stop bullying totally. We can't change 100% of the people. Be nice sometimes.
Can you work with or help the person who is being bullied stand up for themselves? Are there ways to get them to be more assertive or more confident in responding to this?
Well, I got asked that question yesterday. I was talking to somebody yesterday about that very thing about can people stand up? Well, it depends. If they're very traumatized, they've been traumatized because of past experiences. Okay, let's go back to their childhood. Now, I'm not a clinician, I'm an HR consultant, but I know this to be true, is maybe they've gone through sexual abuse. Maybe they've been domestic abuse, and they're traumatized, so they don't have the tools. The first thing I do if somebody comes to me, and I'm a life coach, so I'm a certified life coach, and I know what I can do. I know that I'm all about helping that person come to empower themselves. But when it's an issue that a mental health professional needs to step in, I'm the first to say, look, I believe you need to go and see an expert. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician, but I can see this is something I'm not qualified to help you with. So I will recommend, if they ask for recommendations, I'll recommend. Now, I've done hypnosis with people to help them have more courage. I've done hypnosis to help them to feel safer. The things that I'm qualified, to do as a hypnotist, as a life coach, I can sit there, ask empowering questions. Life coaches ask open-ended questions, why are you attracting these kind of people? And then the person starts thinking, well, this has been happening all my life. And then, clarifying question, are you setting healthy boundaries in your life? Because some of it can be stopped and prevented. It's just telling people, no, it's unacceptable to treat me this way.
And something I think you can also do that will help is get people to listen to your podcast. And by the way, one of the great titles for a podcast, I love it, The Empowered Whistleblower. Tell us about that.
Well, that was the name of my first book, and I was talking about the victimhood and that nobody has to stay a victim. I mean, we all can be victims at a time. Well, I created the podcast about 6 months ago because I was approached by Mental Health News Radio, and I'm under their umbrella as a podcaster, and I was asked to talk about bullying and discrimination. So I do it very broadly, and it's not just for employees, it's for attorneys, spiritual leaders, employers. I mean, I brought on all kind of guests. I mean, I've had a young man who's gay, who identifies as being gay, and he was bullied, and he taught me, about his humor, becoming a comedian, and now he's become an attorney. I've had a handwriting analysis expert, a graphologist, I'll even say his name, David DeWitt. He's up in Connecticut, 50 years of studying handwriting. He can look at somebody's handwriting in seconds, tell if they have bullying tendencies or if they're, suicidal.
And it's accurate?
He's very accurate.
Wow.
50 years of it. I've studied a little bit myself out of curiosity, but yeah.
So that's cool. Let me ask you two things then, Duane. If people want to find out, I guess, more information about either the podcast and or you, best bet is to go to the website?
Yeah, the best place is workplacebullyingsupport.com. That's my website. And everything's there. All my social media, my podcast, everything.
Okay, and they can also, Facebook page as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to thank Duane Westmoreland. I think we go for another 2 hours here, but I'd like to thank you for being my guest this
Thank you.
second half hour. I guess the first half hour, Daphne, Fox-Chinea, and Duane Fernandes. I'd also like to thank my producer, Amy Prisnach, and also Zuzu Welch, who provided the music you'll hear at the beginning of the show each week and at the end. Please join me next Wednesday at 9 a.m. here on the new WPVM LP, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
103.7, Asheville. The voices of Asheville. Listen live anywhere at WPVM.org. Take this.